Today's passage is 2 Samuel chapter 20 verses 1 through 13. Let's read together. Now a troublemaker named Sheba son of Bichri, a Benjamite, happened to be there. He sounded the trumpet and shouted, "We have no share in David, no part in Jesse's son. Every man to his tent. Israel, so are all the men of Israel deserted David to follow Sheba son of Bichri. But the men of Judah stayed by their king all the way from the Jordan to Jerusalem. When David returned to his palace in Jerusalem, he took the 10 concubines he had left to take care of the palace, and put them in a house under guard. He provided for them but had no sexual relations with them. They were kept in confinement till the day of their death, living as widows. Then the king said to Amasa, "Summon the men of Judah to come to me within 3 days, and be here yourself." But when Amasa went to summon Judah, he took longer than the time the king had set for him. David said to Abishai, "Now Sheba, son of Bichri, will do us more harm than Absalom did. Take your master's men and pursue him, or he will find fortified cities and escape from us." So Joab's men and the Kerethites and Pelethites and all the mighty warriors went out under the command of Abishai. They marched out from Jerusalem to pursue Sheba son of Bichri. While they were at the great rock in Gibeon, Amasa came to meet them. Joab was wearing his military tunic, and strapped over it at his waist was a belt with a dagger in its sheath. As he stepped forward, it dropped out of its sheath. Joab said to Amasa, "How are you, my brother?" Then Joab took Amasa by the beard with his right hand to kiss him. Amasa was not on his guard against the dagger in Joab's hand, and Joab plunged it into his belly, and his intestines spilled out on the ground. Without being stabbed again, Amasa died. Then Joab and his brother Abishai pursued Sheba son of Bichri. One of Joab's men stood beside Amasa and said, "Whoever favors Joab, and whoever is for David, let him follow Joab." Amasa lay wallowing in his blood in the middle of the road, and the man saw that all the troops came to a halt there. When he realized that everyone who came up to Amasa stopped, he dragged him from the road into a field and threw a garment over him. After Amasa had been removed from the road, everyone went on with Joab to pursue Sheba, son of Bichri. Amen. Verse 1 of today's passage begins with the words, "happened to be there." There, at that place. Where was that place? At the end of yesterday's passage, Absalom's rebellion ended with Absalom's death, and David was crossing the Jordan and returning to Jerusalem. After he crossed the Jordan and reached Gilgal, a loud argument broke out between the tribe of Judah, who wanted to be recognized for bringing the king back, and the 10 tribes, who felt left out of that work and came forward in anger. They began to argue loudly with one another. Who was closer to the king? Whose contribution was greater? That was what they were fighting about. In one sense, everyone seemed to be acting for the community and for the king. But when we look beneath the surface, they were standing in a selfish place, arguing over their own share, their own portion, and how much of it they would receive. That place was Gilgal. Right in that opening, one man was standing there. Verse 1 consign, Koristan, Kursdi. Verse 1 continues by saying, "Now a troublemaker named Sheba happened to be there." Here the word troublemaker does not simply mean someone with a rough or violent personality. In English we call such a person a troublemaker, someone who causes trouble. In the original language, the word is Belial, meaning a worthless person, a useless person. This kind of man, Sheba, appears in today's passage. He was not someone with a constructive alternative. He was not someone who came forward out of love for the nation with a heart for righteousness. He was a malicious opportunist whose only aim was to use other people's anger as his driving force and destroy the community. Sheba did not miss the unrest among the people. He blew the trumpet and drew everyone's attention. When their attention was fixed on him, he began to shout, "We have no share in David. We have no inheritance in Jesse's son." He declared this and stirred the people up. At just one worthless word of incitement, the 10 tribes of Israel, who had just come out to welcome the king, turned their backs on the king and began to follow this man named Sheba. Where grace disappears, selfish calculation fills the space. And when selfish calculation fills the space, the community is torn apart in an instant. This is the background with which today's passage begins. David returned to Jerusalem and watched this situation with a complicated heart. To bring this confusion under control, he made one bold, unexpected move. He appointed Amasa as commander of the army. Who was Amasa? Until just recently, he had been the commander of the rebel Absalom's army. In other words, Amasa was the man who had aimed his sword at David's very heart. David probably had several reasons for putting Amasa in such an important position. First, there was the reason of embrace and inclusion. One chapter earlier, in chapter 19, we saw David embrace Shimei and Mephibosheth, even though they had opposed him. Humanly speaking, David was constantly trying and striving to embrace Israel as one people. By embracing even those who had been central figures in the rebellion, he wanted to calm the hearts of the people. The second reason was restraint. Joab had ignored David's command and killed David's beloved son Absalom. David wanted to check this uncontrollable general Joab. With these two concerns in his heart, David appointed Amasa as commander of the army in today's passage. In verse 5, David gives this command. He appoints Amasa and orders him to gather the soldiers within 3 days. But through scripture, we see that Amasa could not gather the army within the appointed time, and that he was delayed. In a way, this was only natural. Yesterday's enemy commander suddenly appeared as today's commander. Which man of Judah would gladly follow him? It would have taken time to cross the wall of distrust and gather the scattered hearts of the people. It was difficult for their perception to change in only 3 days, from seeing him as a rebel to recognizing him as the commander of their own army. But David, whose heart had become urgent, could not bear the delay. In verse 6, David calls Abishai. With anxiety in his voice, he says, "Sheba will do us more harm than Absalom did. We must strike them quickly before they enter a fortified city." Where had David's peace gone, the peace he had when he stood before Goliath? Where had David's peace gone, the peace he had when he was surrounded by countless enemies, yet praised God with the people who were with him in the cave of Adullam? Now, all that David could see was crisis management and speed. In the end, David once again came to depend on the sword of Joab, the very man he had wanted so badly to keep away. Abishai and Joab's forces received David's command and began to pursue the rebel Sheba. Beside the great rock in Gibeon, Joab met Amasa, the rival who had tried to take his place. Joab approached him as if he were greeting him. He acted glad to see him. He came near in a friendly way, took hold of his beard, and acted as though he would kiss him. In that very moment, with the dagger he had hidden, Joab stabbed Amasa in the belly. He did not need to stab him twice. With one thrust, he struck him in the belly and killed him. Amasa was, in fact, Joab's older cousin on his mother's side. But for Joab, affection, kinship, and brotherhood had become nothing more than cumbersome decorations. What mattered to him was this. Anyone who interfered with his power was an obstacle. That was all he could see, so he removed the obstacle. Amasa lay dead in the middle of the road, his intestines spilled out. Beside him, one of Joab's young men stood up and began to stir the people again. He said that whoever favored Joab should follow Joab, and whoever followed the king should also follow Joab. Many soldiers passing by stopped in front of that horrific death and began to stare. Rather than grieving over death, they were calculating whose side they should stand on in this struggle for power. But Amasa's body was blocking the road and the march was slowing down. So the young man moved the body into a field. Even after he moved it into the field, the people who saw it still slowed the march, so he covered it with a garment. It was as though he were covering everything up, as though no sin had taken place. Then the crowd followed Joab again and continued pursuing Sheba as if nothing had happened. That is the word given to us today. It is truly a frightening scene. People had become accustomed to bloodshed. They had become numb to wounds. They covered up the uncomfortable truth and simply walked their own road. When we look carefully, this looks very much like the age we live in today. The world moves so quickly. It keeps changing so quickly. Efficiency and results have become what matters. As long as we win, it is fine. As long as we succeed, it is fine. Yet in the process, no one looks to see whether someone is being wounded, whether someone is weeping, or whether someone has collapsed. People simply follow this reality while looking only at which side they must stand on in order to succeed. People's pain is easily consumed, and their tears are quickly forgotten. We are led to ask whether this march of people, each looking only for a way to survive, is not also a picture of us. But as I prepared today's sermon and meditated on the passage, I discovered one unusual point. The story of David has been continuing from 2 Samuel chapter 1, but at some point, within David's story, the story of God stops appearing. Even in 2 Samuel chapter 20, which we read today, God is not seen. There is no prayer from David. There is no word from God. There is not even a prophet's rebuke. Only human thoughts, human judgments, and human political calculations are running wild. Sheba begins to stir people up. David becomes impatient. Joab begins to calculate his own power, and the crowd only remains silent before all of it. The passage keeps showing us this one thing: human beings have become busy without God. The Bible records this very calmly. In truth, this is a very frightening scene. It shows us an age of human beings without God. We remember David in the earlier part of 2 Samuel, when all Israel was enthroning David as king. When everyone was crying out that David should be king, David prayed. He inquired of the Lord and said, "Lord, shall I go up?" He asked once more, "Where shall I go?" And when war broke out as soon as he became king, a war that anyone would have said he must fight, the war against the Philistines, David again asked in chapter 5, "Lord, what shall I do?" But now, for David the seasoned ruler, that asking has disappeared. Before an urgent situation, instead of falling down before God, David is busy arranging a human timetable. David has become experienced enough, it seems, that he no longer has to ask God, and that may be the most dangerous moment for our souls. In the place where prayer disappeared, impatience came in, and that impatience eventually gave birth to tragedy and wounds. Beloved saints, we must look at ourselves today. When we first began our life of faith, and when we first met Jesus deeply, we kept asking again and again, "God, what should we do? Lord, what should I do?" Before every decision we prayed and we remained before God. But as experience accumulates and things become familiar, we begin to grow used to a life that does not ask God. Yet this seasoned confidence that does not ask God does not show us the maturity of faith. It warns us of a danger signal in our faith. So what we must recover today is nothing else. We must recover a faith that asks God. Before we begin any work, before we move, before we think, we must first seek the will of God and pray. That is what must be restored in our lives today. When we cannot believe that we are standing within God's providence, even in a delayed time, we cannot help being tempted by the blade of Joab, by a human solution. Beloved saints, when we put off asking God because we are busy, we can only live by human time. We live in an age where work is plentiful and words overflow, yet the will of God disappears. But where human politics comes to an end, God's faithful reign is established. We must lay down our impatience. We must throw away the sword of human calculation. And we must keep asking the Lord, "Lord, where shall I go? Lord, which road should I take? Lord, where is the will of God in this situation?" As long as these questions remain alive, we can live as people of God, even in the age of human beings. On this day given to us, may you and I become people who seek the will of God first, rather than calculating human thoughts. I bless you in the name of the Lord.